Thank you all very much for foregoing your lunch hour for this discussion about international collaborations, international activities, international potential. My name is Robert Bickers. I'm a historian at Bristol University. I just stepped down from being a co-director of the React Knowledge Exchange Hub. I've sort of swapped that for a role as BIZ's China Science Focal Point for the Creative Economy. Whatever that means, and in fact the RC UK China office have refused to translate it into Chinese. But my role is to try and engineer some encounters, some collaborations between creative economy, people, institutions, agencies in this country and in China. So we're going to be quite open. I've asked each of the four panelists, who I'll introduce in a second, to speak for about 5 minutes about opportunities as they see them, challenges, what works, what we might do, why we should do it, should we do it, and so on, from their own experiences of international collaboration, some of them very, very, very recent. So John Rogers, Mr. John Rogers has just come back from India, in fact, I think, from Duncan of Jordanston College of Art and Design, Professor Rachel Cooper, who is director of many things, including the CX Hub, Hasan Bakhshi from Nesta, and Frank Boyd from the Creative Economies KTN.
Creative Industries KTN.
Creative Industries KTN. Creative Economies, Creative Industries. That's a translation problem when it comes to working in China, for example. Two little snapshots from the China side. I was in Shanghai. I took CX's Andrew Quick and John Dovey to Shanghai to meet, in fact, our team of Shanghai visitors who are here. And I do encourage you to pigeonhole them and ask them what they're doing here, why they're here, what you can do with them. They're here for a week or so, and they come from a wide range of backgrounds in Shanghai, marshalled here by a preparatory office which is setting up a Shanghai National Design Institute. So I took John and Andrew on a tour of Shanghai, which I specialize in. The history of Shanghai is my thing. The history of the Bund at Shanghai, the waterfront, is a particular thing of mine. I took them down the Nanjing Road, led them onto the Bund, and watched them gobsmacked, to be honest, at the skyline facing them. The Shanghai Pudong skyline, if you've seen it, it's 3 of the tallest buildings in China, one of them not yet completed. So China's sort of raw power and achievement in a very short space of time, because I had that same gobsmacked feeling back in 1994, when the second time I went to Shanghai and walked around the corner, and the first of those buildings was there, only one. And I had not seen. Before that, Pudong was flat. There was nothing there, really, except decaying factories. So that was interesting, watching Shanghai's energy and power and creativity and potential playing out on the faces of 2 first-time ever visitors to China. A second little snapshot is that we just had that fascinating talk from Sebastian Conran. 2 or 3 of my visitors from Shanghai asked me afterwards, who is this Conran? Is he famous? Is he well known? Now, there's no reason why lots of people in lots of fields shouldn't know who Sebastian Conran is, even if they use his things or benefit from his design work. But there's clearly a problem or a disconnect or a misfiring there somewhere in our interactions with some of Shanghai's finest premier design institute planners. So, having left you with that, I'll ask John Rogers first to speak to us.
So I want you all to imagine that I've actually got a nice fire playing in the background, and you can come a bit closer, and it's more of a fireside chat than an academic presentation. I want to talk to you by this fire about, you can turn the lights down if you wish. I want to talk to you about, really share some experiences of working with the National Institute of Design in India, NID as it's known. And I don't know how many of you know about NID in India. Fantastic. So again, we can maybe share these stories afterwards. I've been working with them for around about 5 years, and NID is the design school in India. It's the state-funded design school. They have around about 20,000 students applying for around about 100 places per year. They run undergraduate programs, a 4-year undergraduate program across the design spectrum, and they run a 2.5-year taught postgraduate, and again in industry-related design programs. They are not allowed to run PhDs. They are not particularly connected into government funding because they're not an Indian Institute of Technology. There's a current Parliament bill to raise their status to the same as an IIT, which would open up lots of opportunities, but there's a general election in June, so that probably isn't going to happen for at least a year. So how do they do business? And business is exactly what they do. So they work directly with the government to do big problems, big questions. Something that I think as an academic going to India and reflecting back, I haven't sat next to an academic who said, yeah, I can't be with you tomorrow because I've got to go to Mumbai because my train is being launched. Praveen Nahar, who is probably one of the most humble people you will meet, and was my host and has been my host for 5 years, has designed a train, and he's a bit embarrassed about it. He says, but the brief was to design a train that could take 6 times over the capacity, and 3,500 people have died using the previous track. So it's a very challenging problem that he's been given, but he has designed the new trains. They've also, when you're there, you'll notice that there's some very beautiful 1 and 2 rupee coins, one with a thumbs up and one with 2 fingers, that were designed by the graphic design department to enable better communication between the languages. As we know, there's many in India, and particularly with illiteracy. It did get actually quite slated because it was felt to be slightly patronising, but the design school got to design the mint. When have we done that? Another project that they're working on is the national ID card and how biometrics can be better integrated into it, and the systems and services that the biometrics could release from that card. Now, all of those have projects and products which have a reach of potentially 1 billion people. And the impact that can come from that, the negative and the positive impact of working there. So the reflections for me are, is how can we as UK academics learn from the systems in India without the equivalent of an HRC? How can we start to tackle some of the huge questions and problems that the National Institute of Design is able to do because of its direct connectivity with government? And the last thing I wanted to mention was this has been playing out for the last 2 years in a project called the Unbox Festival, which is the most exciting event as an academic that I have been to, and I've been to many, including South by Southwest as a regular attender, except this year because I chose to go to the Unbox Festival Lab, which was running at NID for 2 weeks. It's funded by the AHRC and the British Council. And as a lab, they're posing questions of how do you engage with creative industries, with the partners, with the big questions of India. In this case, it was around the future city, whatever the future and a city will mean to people. But they were able to host 35 participants in the lab, of which 7 or 8 UK HRC academics, 7 or 8 UK design practitioners, and the equivalent from India, in a very melting pot of questions around fundamental cultures about how we do business together. The festival is being held now, I've been told in an email yesterday, that it's the 28th, 29th of November. And really this is a call for you to be there, because the way that we as academics go about doing business internationally and crossing industries, the Unbox Festival is the only place that I've managed to be able to do that in quite such a powerful way. So I'm going to stop there and really just say that what I'm bringing to the table today is that experience of working with India and the challenge it presents us as to how we as academics go about the big issues and the big problems in society.
Thank you, John.
Thank
Rachel.
you.
Yes, I just want to briefly explain the journey from developing a knowledge exchange hub, the Creative Exchange, which is a collaboration between Lancaster University, the Royal College of Art, and Newcastle University, and bringing together a cohort of 21 PhDs funded by the AHRC with some funding that we can give to companies with other academics in other universities to create new products, new services in a space called the digital public space. I want to just give you some brief insight into that and how that's moved into something called China Catalyst and a program of working with companies in this country with postgraduates and with companies in China. So first of all, the Creative Exchange. The Creative Exchange, as you may know, is an AHRC-funded knowledge exchange hub. When we began it, we had lots of challenges. How do you bring 3 universities together and the academics in those universities with academics in universities anywhere in the country alongside a cohort of 21 PhDs, 7 in each university, alongside the creative and digital sector, to address a topic which Bill Thompson from the BBC calls the digital public space, which was evolved out of the BBC looking at how they could let everybody access their archives, repurpose their archives, and develop more products and services into a wider understanding of the notion of something where anyone, anytime, can access anything in the digital space, reuse it, repurpose it, and create new products and services. The themes we have then are all about how do you develop new products, services, and systems with the small creative and digital companies, and how do you create PhDs from that? And what sort of PhDs will they be when they're often doing projects which are short-term, 3-month projects at a time. PhD students usually come in and they want to study a thing, a topic, and they want to do a literature review, they want to maybe do some practice-based work over a year's period with 1 or 2 companies. They don't want to do what actually designers do, which is respond every 3 months to another project in another area. How do they get the scholarly learning from that, their intellectual capacity, build that? We've managed to create a structure that does that. The PhDs work with academics, so we'll give you an example. An academic at Rashid Koak at Liverpool University, Liverpool City Council, and a small creative company are looking at the issue of open planning, actually engaging communities in planning through the digital world. And so those students are working on that over 3 months, and they will move on to something else. So our challenge was to think about that. How do you think about the emerging intellectual scholarly topics? Because this is funded by the AHRC. So although we might give the company £8,000, how do we then actually make this research and look at it from a scholarly perspective? So the students then actually find themes like privacy, personalization. What are those themes in terms of the future, in terms of the digital public space? So that's what the students are doing. We've got at the moment 29 projects, 42 companies, and about the equivalent academics working in it. And they're working across lots of projects and themes. How do we then take that into an international setting? So we have now got something called the China Catalyst, which is a 5.1 million program. And our challenge is to take 400 UK small and medium-sized enterprises through a program of leadership training, creativity training, China awareness and internationalization training, and then train postgraduate students to work with them on projects that will prepare them to link them up with companies and small and medium-sized companies in China, in actually the Guangdong province. And we're working with the Guangdong province of Office of Science and Technology, the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the UK LEPS in Lancashire, Lancashire County Council, and UKTI. So all those bodies, we're all coming together to try and help about 400 companies work with the equivalent number of companies in China, looking at not just the creative and digital, but actually other things like environmental technologies, manufacturing technologies, novel materials, and low carbon. And actually, cities of the future. It's all around cities and what's going to happen in terms of cities and the technologies that we can produce for cities of the future. So we're developing a program which trains the companies, which prepares the students, because the students will do a 2-year postgraduate program, part of which will be in the UK and part of which, 6 months of which will be in China. And they will be the bridge between the companies. So we're actually building that program now and working with Chinese companies. So the challenge for us will be, will a model that we've developed in the UK work in another setting, in an international setting? And I would say one of the things that we're learning is, in UK academia, we've had lots of universities get campuses. In China, we have one, and in Korea, and in other parts of the world, and they're all doing it in a sort of isolated sense. What I think we need is a lot more learning between the universities in the UK on what works and what doesn't work in these sectors, especially when you're working with small and medium-sized companies in both settings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And to show you how disconnected things are, I didn't know about the China Catalyst or quite what form it took. And I'm the creative economy focal point. There we are. Hasan.
So I wanted to offer some reflections based on another project that I'm leading in China. It's an AHRC and Nesta funded project called Crossing the River by Feeling for Stones. It's a research collaboration with a Beijing-based social media platform called Douban, and I apologise in advance for my pronunciation for the visitors from China. The project itself is an experimental research project, and it's looking at the role that online social networks can play in building artistic and commercial links between British artists on the one hand and the Chinese public on the other. It's joint work with the literary platform, Sophie Rochester and Joe Ellis, the literary platform, and Philippe Schneider. And I wanted to just, I guess following the comments from John and Rachel, reflect a bit about the process in which this project has come about, because I think I'm forever sort of reflecting on what is it that I've learned about this collaboration if one was thinking about trying to scale up projects of this sort, because it's quite a small project, but it's been a very challenging one. I think the first thing to say is that the genesis of this project was informal, unconventional, and opportunistic. It stems from a meeting that I had with Douban in Beijing in 2011. It was brokered by the British Council, a very significant intermediary, I'd say, in the space of international research collaborations. Douban, for those who are not familiar with it, is a Chinese language social media platform for book, music, and film lovers. In the meeting, because it's in Chinese, I don't speak Mandarin Chinese, the team from Douban talked me through the platform, and they ended up this sort of half-day presentation and put up a slide of one of the fan pages with a picture of Ian McEwan. And then they asked, could Nesta help engage British artists, such as Ian McEwan, with their users? Now, from my side, as well as this being an obvious opportunity to raise the profile of British artists in China, a collaboration with Douban presented this opportunity to deepen our understanding of Chinese interest in British culture and, critically, the role of social media platforms in promoting but also forming Chinese preferences for British culture. And the research has been a complex one. There's been a number of quite complex relationships to be developed. Organisations like Nesta, an NGO like Nesta, the literary platform, a Chinese technology company, and British artists. And it's required the patience and flexibility of funders, and in this case, the AHRC and Nesta. And I think this experience, a project which is organic, opportunistic, and in its early stages, has quite a long gestation period, may have lessons for future attempts to develop research collaborations overseas more generally. Just to say just a few words on the project itself. China obviously is a highly diverse and geographically fragmented country. Its population is being brought together by online social networks at quite an extraordinary pace. There are around 600 million, over 600 million internet users in China. China is estimated to be home to a quarter of all social network users in the world. Now, We'll know from our own experience of social networks that they allow artists to reach audiences, to tap into the wealth of information being shared on these platforms, and to actually involve audiences in ways that can deliver mutual benefits for all. This appears to be particularly true in China, where our understanding is that social media sites occupy a special place in the lives of Chinese users, not only in terms of the time they spend on them, but also as a gateway to obtain information and cultural content more generally. Now, the social network Douban provides a unique forum to explore these sorts of issues, dedicated, as I say, as it is to books, film and music, with around 70 million registered users. The network prides itself on the quality and independence of its exchanges. So in some sense, it provides a sort of a window into the tastes and cultural preferences of an important segment of the Chinese population. The basic idea behind this project, I mentioned it's an experimental collaboration, is that Nesta, with the help of the literary platform, enlists British artists to participate in online experiments on the platform, book, music or film. And in collaboration with Douban, we collect and analyse the data to address our research questions. The research questions that we are looking at include what particular types of British content are valued by Chinese consumers, how are preferences for British cultural content linked to preferences for other forms of cultural content, how successfully can an active engagement by an artist in Britain stimulate interest in that content on Douban, and last but not least, who are the key influences of opinion for British artists on Douban. We've done a pilot study so far. It's a translation contest with the novelist David Mitchell, which we held last summer. The research is comprising a combination of qual work, of qualitative analysis of engagement by the various participants in this contest. These are people who submitted translations, people who voted on the translations, people who are now purchasing the winning translation on Douban's ebook store, Douban Read, and also some quantitative analysis of the analytics that we're being provided by Douban. We're armed with the user IDs, these voters, the participants, the people who are purchasing these the winning book. We have their user IDs, which is allowing us to use data from that the Douban application programming interface makes available to us as researchers. We're also scraping the Douban website to build a really very deep characterization of the preferences and behaviors of these people who are engaging with this particular piece of work. It's fair to say that identifying and recruiting British artists to take part in this research has been one of the big challenges. There's obviously the language barrier, identifying British artists who are comfortable and who are, or at least, if not conversant, they're comfortable in their work being translated into Chinese. And also, of course, where copyright and publication is involved, we've had to clear the rights. And that means, in practice, we've had to work hard while this project has been developing with a very large number of stakeholders. There's David Mitchell, there's his UK agent, there's his Chinese publisher, there's the Chinese publisher's agent, and there's Douban Read, of course, itself, which is the ebook platform on Douban, to agree the licensing terms. So just to sort of finally say, there's quite a lot of projects that are being presented here in the AHRC showcase have been funded from the Digital Research and Development Fund for the Arts, which some of you will know that Nesta has been working on with the AHRC and Arts Council. This project, frankly, in many ways is further exploring this idea in an international context about how we can develop a research-led, collaborative, open form of experimentation in the cultural sector that we haven't seen previously. And certainly we're keen to reflect on the experiences we've had, talk to more researchers, academic researchers, both in the UK and overseas, about how we can develop and perhaps scale up this sort of model, because the project hasn't completed, but it's certainly proving to be very, very rich in its insights.
Thank you very much, Hasan. Frank?
Okay, so our role as a KTN is to try and provide opportunities for our members, who are predominantly creative businesses, so almost by definition small businesses, if not micro-enterprises, with opportunities to engage in R&D, which is of value to them. So we face, and most of these businesses, as I say, are very small. They have very little capacity. To get them at the same time to think about engaging in R&D projects on an international platform sort of just compounds the problem of how on earth they find the resource to do that. So I've been doing this job for a couple of years. We've tried a few things in that time. some of which seem to be quite promising. I wouldn't say any of them have worked terribly well, and some of them clearly are non-starters. Or the way we've gone about them have been non-starters. The things that clearly haven't worked have been where we've tried to organise sort of trade delegations, which we've done in Europe to Berlin, to Amsterdam. We've done to India, to Mumbai, and to China. And the problem with that is that without really thorough kind of, and probably over a considerable period of time, without thorough preparation, you tend to end up with, half a dozen or a dozen small British companies in a room with a few Chinese or Indian counterparts. And they really, the Venn diagram of what connects them, well, is almost, they probably don't connect. So it is clear that for us, those kinds of things don't work. Things that have worked better have tended to be where we've done, and these have tended to be in collaboration with the Science Innovation Network run out of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, have been where we've done themed events, bringing together academics with people from businesses to address specific issues. So examples of those are, we did an event actually in London which Create were involved in, the AHRC and the EPSRC funded project, on copyright with participation from Martin from Create, Richard Hooper, who was working on the Copyright Hub, and Ian Hargreaves, who wrote the government's paper on approaches to copyright. And that was, I think, there was, I think, a useful outcome from that in terms of particularly the influence on Hooper's thinking about the Copyright Hub. Another one that we did actually as a collaboration with Nesta, following on from Nesta's Next Gen report about the future of the skills in the computer games industry, and it's interesting that of the 20 or so recommendations in that, 19 of them were about skills and one of them was about research. And so we did some work with the AHRC, with Nesta, bring together academic researchers and people from games companies, which led to subsequent AHRC funding for networking projects, which are still going on. So what the outcomes of those remain to be seen. But there seems to be something of a pattern emerging where we work with, where we are able to engage with the research councils in this project, that seems to be a better way of creating a platform for development. We had a similar experience, actually. I mentioned that we sent a trade delegation to India, to Mumbai, which was, it was my first trip to Mumbai, to India, so that was fantastic, but I'm not sure there was anything terribly useful that came out of it. Except the beginnings of a dialogue with SIN in India. And what we decided to do subsequently was actually to engage in the project that John talked about, the Unbox project, as a way of, again, starting to build a longer-term relationship. For us, that's in the context of the Technology Strategy Board's Future Cities agenda, to try and find an opportunity for UK businesses who are developing approaches to addressing the problems of creating sustainable cities for the future. And I mean, again, I think it remains to be seen where that will go. But I think the Unbox lab finished last week.
It finished on Friday.
Yeah, and I mean, the design
of that
march
and the excitement coming out of it, but no kind of preordained kind of projects.
Yeah.
They're starting to.
But that does seem to be, with what we seem to be able to do, what we seem to be engaged in there is building a platform in which there may well be opportunities
Absolutely.
for sort of productive collaboration between businesses and researchers, from India and from the UK.
At a very grassroots level as well. It feels genuine relationships. They haven't come with projects to put on the table.
So I think that kind of approach does seem to be something that could work. As I say, I mean, the real challenge for us is to find a way of creating environments, building projects, building platforms which do allow, predominantly the SMEs that we're working with, to do something which is going to deliver value to them in the short term, because I think that's a challenge. If you're working in a university or in a bigger company, there is perhaps a little more fat. There is perhaps the space to engage in something that is speculative, that really isn't possible for an SME that is worried about how it's going to pay its next wage bill, how it's going to meet its next deadline. I was introduced as being part of the Creative Industries KTN. For those of you who don't know, what's happening at the moment is that the Technology Strategy Board funds currently 16 knowledge transfer networks. On April the 1st, we merge into one knowledge transfer network, which actually is which I think is a huge opportunity. I was at a meeting last week, the first meeting of all the staff of the new KTN. So suddenly I've gone from running an organisation of 6 people to being a director of an organisation with 120 members of staff, and my budget's gone from 750,000 to being part of an organisation with a budget of 15 million. Perhaps not large compared with the university, but actually to be part now of a national network, which is by nature interdisciplinary, so that there are people there with sort of PhDs and industry experience in chemistry, nanotechnology, biosciences, and the creative industries. I think that's we've decided that one of our major priorities is to build a platform for international work. The question is how we go about that. I think there are, and I think one of the great things that the AHRC has done over the last couple of years is actually the work in Brighton around the Brighton Fuse and developing this notion of fusion. If you go and talk, and in the last year I've been in Vietnam, I've been in India. If you start talking about this idea of fusion and the importance of having people from arts and humanities backgrounds and arts and humanities skills in technology development, in the development of projects, it's news to them. And I think that there's a great opportunity there for collaboration between the KTN in the future and the research councils on creating platforms in other countries. And the final thing I'd say is that we've talked a lot about India and China, but of course Europe is a huge opportunity, particularly in the context of Horizon 2020. I was at a meeting last week in Paris of one of the European technology platforms, which was the Networked Electronic Media platform, and it changed its name at the meeting to the New European Media, because they recognise that they need to bring in people from creative industries backgrounds, not just infrastructure companies. The Commission itself now has a creativity office who are desperate to find ways. They're holding a meeting next week in Luxembourg, if anybody wants to go, to try and find ways of funding the engagement of creative SMEs in the Horizon 2020 R&D programs. So I think there are huge opportunities over the next few years, but I don't know yet quite what the answers are or how we engage with that. So I'm very keen to find ways of working with universities, with the research councils on trying to find some approaches that actually work and deliver value to our members.
Thank you, Frank. So get yourselves to Luxembourg. A range of different but overlapping experiences here and perspectives. We're not going to talk at you for very much longer. I just wonder if any of the panel have comments on each other's.
Well, it's interesting that I think one of actually Rachel's point and Frank's point of how do we come together to work internationally. So it's not about the fantastic University of Dundee School of da-da-da. It's not about that. And actually what was really interesting, a very, very brief meeting, but Emma Wakefield from the AHRC and I were called into the director's office. Sorry. It wasn't that good a meeting, but and the director, National Institute of Design, said, well, we really want to work with you, and the key thing for working with the UK research organisations is that it's two-way. And he said, would you consider setting up an AHRC lab here that was a two-way lab? Not a University of Dundee, not a University of Lancashire or Preston or Falmouth. It was actually, could we set up an HRC lab, and that's kind of that question back to you as an audience is, would that work? Could that work? How would that work? I think it could. And I'd love to see these kind of less territorial institutional events and organisations and much more collegiate. How can Britain work with India, for example?
I really strongly agree with that. I think the thing I'd add into that as well is the non-universities, which obviously there's always been a...
Yes.
Obviously there's some pretty important constraints that research councils face in funding research outside universities, but at the same time we do need to come up with more imaginative models, because the nature of the research questions that are being, that we want, that creative SMEs, for example, will be interested in engaging them, often require, knowledge that doesn't necessarily just reside in university faculty. So I think that's another area where a bit of
and the Unbox Labs started to kind of tackle those questions as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a very interesting model, yeah.
Thank you. Now we have a wide range of expertise and interest in the room. From Nick Kay is leading a university's new China strategy, which is so different perspectives on what university strategies, silo strategies perhaps at the moment. Perhaps it ought not to be from the side of things. From UKTI, Mark Lever over here. John Dovey, sort of just into China for the first time the other week. So plenty of questions here. How do we capture the organic, the organic, informal and opportunistic, and how do we marry that to big models of collaboration with a provincial government, probably one of the richest provincial governments in the world, I would imagine. The floor is open to you. Okay.
Hello. I'd like to comment on this from an Australian perspective, and we actually partner with what is the writing platform that's come out of the literary platform, working into Southeast Asia. And what we actually find is that in the Asia-Pacific Rim, rather than the big organisations, we do an audit of the small to mediums and the independents that are going into those markets, because what they're doing is they're usually a younger demographic. They're usually establishing relationships on a personal basis without necessarily going in with a mandate or an objective beyond having a true valuable exchange process. And what we find is that actually from those smaller interventions into the Asia-Pacific region, that actually allows us as either funders or bigger institutions to go in and to build on those real relationships that have already been established. So I think in some ways, there's a lot of, not letting go, but a lot more valuing of those kind of bottom-up relationships that are actually there. And what happens as well as there being a real relationship is a lot of people going into those countries in the Asia-Pacific region is that they're going in not just to go in, learn something, take something and go back again. It's very much a longer term development in some case. Some of those Southeast Asian countries aren't particularly well resourced but are growing at a rapid rate. So it's a very different approach from going in saying, I'm going in, I'm going to go to this market, I'm going to develop this for what I need to take back out, and much more about a longer term investment into those relationships that might not bear anything, but actually that's how the relationships are growing, and that actually brings really, really rich relationships and really fruitful opportunities to enter market as a follow-up. So when, I'm sorry, the lady, I came in late, when you were saying how we work, in that way, well, for instance, you don't have to go in as one country. So where I'm based in Queensland, that's like a portal almost to that region, and we work already with a number of UK companies and research orgs, which is why I'm here. But I think that it needs to be and I don't know, this is a challenge for everyone, how you do it, how you identify what people are doing. But I think that looking and identifying who is already playing in those spaces, who's already having results, and just asking them if you can partner with them. Most people will do. Everybody wants to partner. Everyone wants to share resources. So sometimes you just don't have to go in new. You just have to look and see what's already there and partner with somebody who's already doing it really well.
Thank you.
Just a reaction. I have a strong sense that there are lots of existing personal relationships between, say, for example, British academics and Chinese researchers, between Chinese technology companies, British academics, between British academics, Australian academics. I'm a research fellow at QUT, and Australian academics, and in turn, therefore, Chinese. And yet, I've really struggled in this project to get a sense of where those relationships were and how I could tap into them. And in effect, I've been forced to possibly reinvent the wheel. I mean, you know, the research is sort of happening in a bit of a... This is what I meant by informal. And I think this goes back to the point about partnership. We certainly need, surely some low-hanging fruit, is some sort of structures whereby we can actually just share those relationships. I'm more than happy, it's completely in my interest in this project, to almost give out the insights to anyone, right, so they can come in on the project and help me work on it, because I've really struggled, I have to say, to identify... that's one of the reasons why we don't have a British academic working on this project. It wasn't through want of trying or the HRC trying. We just really struggled to find anyone who was interested in what we were doing and who, you know, and I'm sure there must be lots of people with expertise and knowledge, more than, frankly, I have got, to have made this project a success.
Well, I think there's again, going back to this personal relationship. So if I described on paper my 5-year collaboration with the National Institute of Design, which has included meeting Patricia Hewitt, working with the British Council, meeting the director of the Indian Space Research Office, what that amounts to actually is about £2,500 of funding, an enormous amount of goodwill from Praveen and his wonderful wife that cooks for us when I'm there, and the family that my kids go over and they play together, and those real human relationships that enable something to be sustained without, I'm afraid to say, any major funding, but actually has enormous value to me and to my university to send me there, and to be given a guest house, very simple living, and to eat food with families there. It sounds quite hippie, I'm sorry, but there is this genuine thing that we have to do a bit of soul searching that, of how we go about our international business. Now, that isn't necessarily hugely sustainable, but actually it is on a personal... Our relationship's going to go beyond the end of a grant, and we're not going to have to worry about the report that we put in, because we're going to be working together for 30 years.
I think that's one of the challenges. I mean, there was in the panel that was in here before, John Dovey was talking about the Bristol hub, and there was one of the learnings from it was it's important to curate people. And before I was running the KTN, I ran a series of what I think research councils call sandpits, I called labs, which were really about developing collaborative relationships between people, and those can take years to develop, and it's quite hard to find the structures which continue to support that. I mean, I think the other key partner, I think, in the work that we've done internationally that we should mention is the British Council. And I think the British Council actually has done, they've been very important in the development of the Unbox Labs. And in terms of curating people, I think the programs they've done, like the Young Creative Entrepreneurs program, about establishing relationships with people, with people who've got small businesses in other countries at an early stage in the development of their careers, and establishing those relationships and developing them over time is also a very important and valuable approach, I think.
So the insights there are that you have to have... I mean, universities have been talking about globalisation and internationalisation of their research for the last 20 years. They are doing it to some extent in having their own campuses there or taking people over there. And the government have always been putting, policies in place to take groups of people over. So the insights there are that you do have to have top-down, but you also have to have bottom-up. And it's what happens in the middle and how long it's sustainable, because your relationship will be sustainable, whether you're at Dundee or at London.
Or whether Praveen Nahar is at NID or...
So actually, but what does that do for the knowledge that is retained at Dundee? How far does it go back into that institution? How do we actually maintain it both in the universities and in the SMEs? If you've got a 3-man SME or a micro, they can build a relationship up, but if something happens with that company, where does it go? So there's a bit about sustainability over the long term in those relationships, and can we do it more than being an internationalisation or a local relationship? What do we do? What are the models we can do for both our universities and our creative sector to ensure that it's deeper and longer? I think it's a big question I would ask. Research question number 1.
Professor Wang and then Nick Kay.
Thank you. I'm very honored to have heard China several times in this session. So my question is about China and Douban. I think the work you have done on Douban is very, very important because the social media in China is an enclosed sphere. So the cross-cultural communication needs a platform, needs an interface, transitory interface. But this interface is difficult to establish because of the censorship, because of the difficulty of translation, and etc., etc. So my question is about the sustainability of your efforts. How to keep people always attached to this platform, including the internet users, the British artists, how to keep the interactivity to evade it to become an internet portal. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for your interest in the project. One of the research questions in this program of research, the translation contest with David Mitchell is really our first experiment, I guess, but I hope it will be a series of experiments with different writers and different forms of engagement. But one of the research questions is, how can active engagement, what modes of active engagement are most successful, in terms of inspiring users, Chinese users. And one of the thing that we've learned about the translation contest so far, I mean, it's still, the research continues until the end of August. But one of the things that we've learned is that we had about just over 220 complete translations that were submitted. And what we've done is we've then got a professional literary translator to analyse these translations, including the winning translations, but just to do some sort of qualitative analysis of the of how difficult the translators found this. And what we found is that there's a relatively small community. So 220, how big is it? It was maybe smaller than I may have expected, but frankly that was based on very little because there isn't really a tradition of doing these sorts of contests. But what you find is there's a relatively contained group of individuals, in this case 220, who are devoting quite a lot of effort and engagement, in terms of, it's quite a big task, particularly the two short stories that David Mitchell provided us with. They were quite challenging stories to translate into Chinese. And what we found, therefore, is this hasn't been a mass engagement mechanism. What we haven't found is that there are thousands and thousands of people who on the back of this contest have engaged in it, and on the back of it are then going to follow David Mitchell's books and buy his other books, for example. We're not finding that. But what we are finding is there's a relatively small group of individuals who are very engaged, who in turn actually are have a lot of people following them on Douban, and therefore indirectly, what seems as a very narrow form of engagement is potentially having a bigger impact. Now that's obviously one of the the research challenges to try and measure that and analyse it and understand it. But I guess what I'm saying is, ostensibly, what seems as being a narrow form of engagement, if you research it in its wider context and collect the right data, it may be having bigger effects and bigger ripples than you would think. But I think, to be fair, what we need to do is see social media platforms offer a whole different modes of engagement by which British artists can connect with users and with the Chinese public. It needn't just be translation contests. It may be the case that if a British feature film, for example, is has theatrical release in China, can the social media platform be used by a film company, not just to promote the film in China, which is most obvious, but actually understand the process by which preferences are formed for that film. Understanding what is it about the film that actually has some resonance in a local context with Chinese audiences. So I think there's actually a very rich sort of variety of mechanisms that can be used through social media to both promote content, but also to build that relationship with the Chinese public. That's what we're researching, anyhow.
Thank you. Professor Kay.
I have another question, which is... My question relates to the relationship between institutions and the creative industries. Obviously, with this event, with the HRC, and with the push to collaboration between UK universities and creative industry, we're seeing some significant change and some significant cultural change. And I wondered if you could characterize the relationship to some extent in China between the academies, the universities, and the creative industries. Are there any changes there? Is the relationship principally with the academies? Are you seeing research universities like PKU and Fudan engaging more with the creative industries, or is it there already?
When thank you, Nick, and perhaps Professor Wang could contribute. But I mean, when I got in touch with the Science and Innovation Network team in Shanghai and said, this is what the knowledge exchange hubs are about. It's unlocking potential value within the universities and building connections with the creative economy wider sector. The guy there in Shanghai said that's exactly what the Chinese are doing. That's exactly what they want to do as well. But that was his perspective. That's the thing. That's one of the benefits for them of engaging with us is that we are also exploring this, and we have some models. We'll see whether they all work. They certainly deliver a lot of excitement. How far that excitement gets then translated into active, real projects delivering value is another matter, but we shall see.
We have the same experience that is what they are doing and attempting to do across both science and the creative sectors. So yes, I don't know how embedded it is, but that's the reason for this China Catalyst. It was that they had actually been in contact with Lancaster University ahead of the programme to say that's what they wanted to do.
When David Cameron visited China, as David Willits mentioned, in early December, he announced a 100 million fund from the UK side, which is being matched by the Ministry of Science and Technology in China. Creative economy is in there. So it survived, in fact, where several things didn't. So although the mechanics of that haven't been worked out yet, they are coming soon. But a lot of that is going to be about networking and building networks. Clearly designing a platform, a flexible platform which can turn enthusiasm, the organic, the accidental into ongoing, long-term sustainable relationships, which is important. And that does need resource. So my thought about, it's all right to do with lots and lots of small people, it's fine, but there are resource challenges, as we've also been hearing here, for SMEs and others.
And there's resource matching. I think another thing that's very much in the room is having worked with creatives and academics in India. Indian academics from the state-funded academics are facing a huge rift between their counterparts in private universities and in industry. So it's almost becoming a pure vocation. I think that's exactly the same as when I've been looking at TSB grants with SMEs, and you've got to try and do time match between a university's full economic costing and how an SME to things. So I think actually resource matching is probably one of the, if you want a research challenge, I think that cross-council and international resource matching and frequency matching on that level is something that we really need to consider quite urgently to enable collaborations to happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a good model for that at the moment in India, with Technology Strategy Board having set up a joint fund with, or a memorandum of understanding with its closest equivalent in India called GITA, where, so now there are calls for collaborative projects between UK businesses and Indian businesses, where they go through the same application process but independently, and trying to, although that hasn't yet been applied to any creative projects, it's mainly been in the field of sort of energy generation and other heavy lifting parts of the economy. But to establish those kinds of models, I think, is essential actually to get any kind of meaningful collaborations off the ground.
And trying to establish a set of values that cross between it, because that's something that you can take outside the economics of a project, is actually starting with a much more of a value-driven proposition, so that if you have shared values, then you can start to match in the resources into that. And it's something that comes in almost last minute, or when the project's started. And I think the reason why my relationship with the National Institute of Design has worked is that shared values, of which projects have spun out.
Thank you. I feel we should wrap up to allow the next panel to come in here. So unless anybody has any urgent, important final question. But thank you all for coming. If we're talking about sort of good models, then we could have started with this, in fact, because it's a bit awkward to be sitting up here when you're down there. And this is clearly could be a very lively conversation, and we need to be all together. But I think I've already learned a lot from this, and I think these conversations here and with you need to continue. And I think there's a very strong role for HRC within this, both in China, in India, and elsewhere, of course. Let's not forget Europe. Or the rest of Europe, I should say. But,
including America.
Including America.
Maybe somewhere else soon.
Yes, yes, indeed. So thank you, John, Rachel, Frank, and Hasan, and thank you for coming. Thank you.